The boy they never believed in. The soft hum of the city traffic outside barely reached the quiet kitchen where Keanu Reeves sat, sipping tea as the early morning light crept in. The sun filtered gently through the blinds, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Across from him sat a young boy, 12 years old, with wide, curious eyes and a nervous twitch in his fingers. This was no ordinary morning. This was the day that would change everything. His name was Elias. He wasn't loud or bold like the other kids at school. Instead, he was quiet, thoughtful, and often kept to himself. He had a softness about him, like the kind of child who noticed when a bird flew low or when a janitor looked tired. But in school, that gentleness was misunderstood. They didn't see it as strength. They saw it as weakness. Keanu had tried to prepare him. "Just be yourself, son," he had said gently that morning. "No one else can be you better than you." Elias nodded, but something lingered in his eyes. Fear, not of the stage, not even of singing, but of the laughter, of the whispers that followed him through the school halls, the mockery that clung to his name like wet clothes. For months now, a group of kids had targeted him. He was the actor's weird son, they said, too soft-spoken, too quiet, too different. Then came the music assignment. Each student had to perform something for the upcoming parents' showcase. Sing, play an instrument, recite a poem. Elias had chosen to sing, not because he wanted attention, but because music was where he felt most alive. When he sang in the shower, the house filled with something so real it felt like time stopped. But no one at school knew that side of him. And one boy, Logan, made sure of that. Logan had overheard Elias practicing quietly in the music room during lunch. That was all it took. By the end of the day, a cruel idea had taken root. Logan suggested to the teacher that Elias sing solo at the showcase. He said it with a smile so wide it masked the malice behind it. The teacher, unaware, agreed. And suddenly, Elias was on the program, scheduled last, right before the principal's closing speech. The final act. The one no one would forget. When Elias found out, he knew. It wasn't about giving him a chance. It was a setup. The snickers in the hallway, the "can't wait for your concert, superstar," the fake applause, they made it clear. That night, Keanu sat across from his son and saw the storm inside him. "You don't have to do this," Keanu said softly. "We can talk to your teacher. We can pull out." But Elias shook his head. His voice was quiet. "No, Dad. If I back out now, they win." Keanu nodded slowly. He felt something shift. This wasn't just a school performance. This was a line drawn in the sand. It wasn't about the bullies. It was about a boy finding his voice. The next few days were a blur. Keanu rearranged his schedule, flying back early from a film shoot just to be there. He cooked with Elias. They watched old musicals. They sang together in the living room. Elias started to open up just a little. He still hesitated, still doubted, but every day his voice grew stronger. Meanwhile, at school, the tension built. The event was all the students talked about. Rumors spread. People said Elias would crack, that he'd freeze, that he'd cry. But no one knew what Keanu knew. They didn't know the late-night rehearsals. They didn't hear the way Elias sang when he thought no one was listening. They didn't see the strength it took for him to keep walking those halls. Finally, the day arrived. The school auditorium was filled with parents, teachers, and students. The lights were warm, the air thick with excitement. Backstage, Elias stood in a small corner, his heart racing. He could hear the laughter, he could hear Logan's voice. "Ready to embarrass yourself?" But Elias said nothing. He closed his eyes, breathed in deep, and thought of the songs he used to sing with his mom. He thought of his father's calm voice. He thought of the boy he wanted to be, not the one they saw. Keanu stood by the side curtain, watching. He didn't say anything. Just placed his hand gently on Elias's shoulder. "You've already won," he whispered. The performance began. Act after act went by. Applause rose and fell. A dance group. A violin solo. A skit. Finally, the lights dimmed again, and the teacher's voice came through the microphone. And now our final student performance, please welcome Elias Reeves. There was a pause, then a few claps. Scattered, unsure. Elias walked out. The room was big, brighter than he remembered, faces blurred together, but he walked slowly to the center, stood behind the mic, and looked out. For a moment, silence. Then someone laughed. But Elias didn't flinch. He looked down, then up again, and opened his mouth. And when he sang, everything stopped. His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't polished, but it was pure. It carried weight. Not the kind you hear in famous singers, but the kind you feel. Like the sound of someone who's been holding pain and beauty and truth deep in their chest, waiting for the right moment to let it all go. You could hear the shaking at first, but as the verse continued, it faded. He sang from a place that had never been touched by cruelty. He sang from a place that knew what it felt like to be invisible and still choose to be seen. Keanu stood behind the curtain with tears in his eyes. The bullies were silent. Logan stared with his mouth slightly open. One by one, the audience leaned in. Nobody moved. Nobody laughed. They just listened. When Elias reached the final note, it hung in the air like a question. A beat of silence followed, then another, then applause. Real applause. The kind that starts slow and builds. People stood. They clapped like they didn't know what else to do. Some wiped tears. Even the teachers looked stunned. Elias stood there for a second, confused. Then he smiled. Small, honest, like a window opening in winter. He stepped back, bowed, and walked off stage. As he passed Keanu, the boy didn't say a word. He just wrapped his arms around his dad, buried his face in his chest, and whispered, "I did it." Keanu didn't answer. He just held his son tighter than he ever had before. Echoes that wouldn't fade. The sun rose a little softer the next morning. Keanu and Elias sat quietly at the kitchen table, sipping hot chocolate. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full of relief, full of something deeper. It was as if they were both still processing what had happened the night before. Outside, the world looked the same. The street was still lined with sleepy trees. The mail truck still moved at the same lazy pace, but inside everything had changed. Keanu watched his son closely. Elias looked lighter, like he'd dropped something heavy he'd been carrying for years. The way he held his spoon, the way he sat straighter, it was different. Subtle, but powerful. They didn't laugh, Elias said softly, almost to himself. Keanu nodded. They listened. There was a pause, and then Elias whispered, "They clapped." Keanu smiled gently. They stood. Elias didn't say anything for a long moment. His eyes drifted to the window, where a single bird was hopping along the sidewalk. Finally, he said, "I don't think I'll ever forget that sound." And he didn't. That applause followed him in the days that came after. It echoed in the hallways at school, where students who used to walk past him now stopped to say hello. Some patted him on the shoulder. Others asked if he'd sing again. His teachers smiled wider, called on him more. Even the cafeteria lady gave him an extra cookie. But with the attention came something unexpected. Silence from the ones who mattered before. Logan didn't say a word. He avoided Elias entirely. His group of friends stopped their usual mocking. They acted like nothing had ever happened. But Elias could feel it. The shift, the weight of it. In class, Logan stared at the board. But when the teacher wasn't looking, his eyes flicked toward Elias with something sharp. It wasn't the old smirk. It was something colder. A storm that hadn't left. Keanu had warned him. Sometimes when you shine, the people who live in shadows don't know how to handle it. "What do I do?" Elias asked. "You stay kind. Stay strong. Don't let their silence shape your story." And Elias tried. But the next week the whispers started again. Not loud, not obvious. Just small, cruel things he probably lip-synced. His dad must have paid someone to coach him. It was just one performance, don't let it go to your head. The comments weren't shouted like before. They were planted like seeds. And slowly they tried to grow. Elias felt them more. Then he heard them. He'd be walking to class and feel the sting of eyes on his back. He'd sit at lunch and notice the way people looked away when he joined the table. And then one day, someone shoved a note into his locker. No name, no handwriting to trace. Just 5 words written in thick marker. You don't belong up there. He stood frozen, staring at it. His fingers trembled, the paper crinkled slightly in his hand. He didn't tell Keanu that night. He didn't want to ruin the peace they had found. But Keanu knew something was off. School okay? He asked gently, later that evening. Elias nodded too quickly. Yeah, just a little tired. Keanu didn't press. He just placed a hand on his son's shoulder and left it there. A silent promise. The next day, things got worse. During music class, the teacher praised Elias in front of everyone. I think we may have a real talent in our midst, she said with a proud smile. We should consider entering him in the district youth talent competition next month. The room went quiet. Then Logan muttered, "Oh great, more singing." Some kids laughed, others stayed silent. But it hurt. The teacher didn't hear, but Elias did. After class, Elias stayed behind. He approached the teacher with a soft voice. I don't think I want to join the competition. She looked surprised. But Elias, you're the most ready. You've got a gift. He hesitated. I don't think I'm good enough. The words stung his own lips. He wasn't lying to her. He was lying to himself. The teacher didn't push. She just nodded and said, If you ever change your mind, let me know. When Elias got home, Keanu was out in the backyard, tightening a bulb on a garden light. Elias sat on the back steps, watching him for a while before saying anything. Dad? Keanu looked over. Did you ever feel like people wanted you to fail? Keanu stood still, then walked over and sat beside him. All the time, he said, especially when I was starting out. They thought I was too quiet, too slow, not flashy enough. They laughed when I tried to be serious. But I kept going. Why? Because I believed in something bigger than their opinions. Elias looked down. What if I don't? Keanu reached over, gently turning his son's face toward him. Then borrow mine, until you find your own again. That night, Elias sat in his room holding his guitar. He didn't play it. He just looked at it, his fingers brushing the strings. Somewhere inside, a fire still flickered. But the wind was strong, and he wasn't sure if it would last. The next day, something happened that neither of them expected. Keanu received an email. It was from the local news station. They had heard about Elias's performance at the school showcase. Apparently, someone in the audience had recorded a short clip and uploaded it online. It had quietly gone viral. Now the news anchor wanted to invite Elias to sing live on their morning show. Not as Keanu Reeves' son, but as Elias Reeves. Keanu showed the email to his son. Elias stared at the screen. Why me? Because the world saw what your school didn't. Elias shook his head. But if I go on TV, it'll only make things worse. Keanu paused. Or it could change everything. Elias didn't answer. He stood, walked to his room, and closed the door. An hour passed. 2. Then Keanu heard it. Soft at first, then stronger. The sound of music. Not a song of joy, not a song of celebration, but a song of battle. The kind that's sung when you're tired, broken, but still standing. And Keanu smiled. His son hadn't answered with words. He had answered with music. Louder than their silence. The living room was quiet except for the gentle hum of Keanu's old stereo playing vinyl jazz in the background. The sun had just risen, painting the sky in soft colors of orange and gold. But inside the Reeves home there was a storm of decisions building. Elias sat at the kitchen counter, turning the news station's email over and over in his hands. It was printed out now, something solid to hold, something harder to ignore. His fingers kept curling around the edge of the paper like he was trying to crush the fear hiding behind the opportunity. "They want me to sing," he said finally, breaking the silence. Keanu looked up from the stove where he was flipping pancakes. "They saw something in you, son. But what if they're wrong?" Keanu set the spatula down and turned to him. "Then prove them right." Elias didn't smile. Not yet, but he didn't look away either. The boy who had once stared down an auditorium of doubters was still in there. Maybe a little bruised, maybe a little quiet, but still standing. After breakfast, they sat in the living room with Keanu's old guitar between them. It wasn't flashy or expensive. It was the same one he'd played when he was Elias's age. The wood was worn smooth at the edges, the strings slightly frayed from years of quiet use. "You can say no to the news show," Keanu said. "But if you say yes, you do it for you, not for them. Not to prove anything. Not to get back at the kids who laughed, just because your voice deserves to be heard." Elias nodded slowly. He picked up the guitar. His hands were shaky at first, but once he placed his fingers on the frets, muscle memory took over, and then came his voice. Tentative at first, then strong. By the end of the song, Keanu didn't clap. He just whispered, "That's the boy they're waiting for." Later that day, Elias told the school music teacher he'd changed his mind. He wanted to enter the district youth talent competition. Her smile was so wide it looked like sunlight. And even though some students overheard and exchanged glances, even though he felt eyes boring into his back, Elias stood tall. Then they emailed the news station. 2 days later, a black van pulled into their driveway. A small crew stepped out with lights, microphones, and cameras. The host, a kind woman with warm eyes named Julia, smiled at Elias like he was already a star. "So," she said gently, kneeling down to eye level, "ready to show the city what you've got?" Elias looked at his dad. Keanu nodded once. "I think so," Elias whispered. They filmed the segment in their backyard. Just a stool, a mic, the guitar, and the open sky. No fancy lighting, no scripts, just one boy and his voice. Elias sang with eyes half closed. He didn't imagine a crowd. He imagined peace. The lake near their cabin, the smell of his mom's old scarf, the weight of his father's hand on his shoulder. And when the final note left his lips, the crew didn't say anything for a long moment. Then Julia clapped softly. "That," she said, "was real." The segment aired the next morning. It wasn't a viral sensation. It didn't break the internet. But it was shared. Teachers posted it, musicians commented. Local news anchors praised his tone, his soul. Strangers emailed the school asking to hear more. Some even wanted to meet him. And back at school, something shifted again. A girl from his science class handed him a folded paper during lunch. For a moment, he froze. But when he opened it, it wasn't a cruel message. It was a drawing of him with his guitar and a little speech bubble that read, "Thank you for singing." He looked up. The girl was already walking away, her face red. Still, not everyone was happy. Logan and his friends began keeping their distance, but not out of fear, out of planning. Because the district talent competition was coming fast, and some people didn't like seeing others rise. One day after school, Elias went to the music room to practice. The lights were dim. The door was slightly open. He walked in and froze. His sheet music was shredded on the floor. His guitar string had been cut, and written across the board in red marker were the words, "You're not special, just lucky." For a long moment, Elias stood still. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just breathed, deep and long. Then he picked up the torn papers, collected what he could, and walked home with quiet steps and a louder heart. When Keanu saw the look on his face, he didn't ask what happened. He simply said, "Come on." They got into the car and drove, not to a fancy store, not to a studio. They went to a little shop tucked behind a bookstore, one that smelled like old strings and wood polish. Keanu walked up to the counter. "My son needs a new guitar." The owner smiled, handed over a polished wooden case and said, "This one's been waiting for the right hands." Elias opened it slowly. The instrument inside wasn't loud or shiny. It was simple. Perfect. He picked it up, strummed once, and something clicked. When they got home, Keanu said, "Want to talk about what happened?" Elias looked down. "They cut my string, tore my papers." Keanu's jaw tightened. But he didn't speak in anger. Instead, he said, "You can't control what they break, only what you rebuild." Elias nodded, and rebuild he did. Every evening, he practiced. He rewrote his lyrics. He memorized new chords. He learned how to sing not just from his mouth, but from his story. And when the competition day came, he was ready. Keanu stood backstage with him like he always did. This time, Elias didn't ask, "What if they laugh?" He asked something else. "What if I don't win?" Keanu smiled. "Then you still win." Elias walked out onto the stage. Hundreds of people filled the auditorium. Judges, students, teachers, parents. Even Julia from the news show sat near the front. He saw a few familiar faces from school, including Logan. He closed his eyes, breathed in, and began. His voice filled the room, soft at first, then strong. It rose like a tide, carrying every listener with it. He didn't just sing. He told a story. His story. And when the final note echoed through the air, the room was silent. Then, applause. Thunderous. Sincere, when he walked off stage, Keanu was waiting with his arms open, but before he could say a word, one of the judges stood up and called his name. Elias Reeves. "Stay here for a moment, please." The audience grew quiet, again. The judge stepped forward with a small envelope in hand. "We've made our decision," he said. And then he opened it. And everything changed. The voice that touched the world, Elias, stood frozen as the judge held the envelope in one hand and the microphone in the other. The audience leaned forward, the air tense with silence. Keanu watched from the side of the stage, his heart steady, his hands clasped tightly. For him, it was never about the award. It was about his son standing tall. The judge cleared his throat. "After long discussion, we have chosen the winner of this year's District Youth Talent Competition." A pause. This young artist didn't just sing a song. He told a story. He made us feel something real, raw, honest. The envelope opened slowly. And the winner is Elias Reeves. The room erupted. Cheers, applause, a few gasps. Even teachers who didn't know him stood to clap. Elias blinked, stunned. He didn't move, didn't speak. Then Keanu stepped forward from the wings and gently nudged him forward. Elias walked out toward the judge, his steps slow, his eyes wide. The medal was placed around his neck. The trophy in his small hands felt heavier than he thought it would. The judge leaned in and whispered, "Keep singing. The world needs more of this." Elias nodded. A few minutes later, backstage was a whirlwind of photos, questions, and congratulations. His teacher hugged him. His music classmates clapped him on the back. Some kids he didn't even know asked to take selfies with him. It was dizzying, unreal. But the moment that meant the most came quietly. As they walked toward the exit, a hand tapped Elias on the shoulder. He turned. It was Logan. The boy looked different now, smaller somehow. Not because he'd shrunk, but because Elias had grown. Logan didn't smirk, didn't sneer. Instead, he said, "Hey, that was good, just that. Simple, awkward, but not fake." Elias looked at him for a long second, then nodded. "Thanks," and they walked away. No more words, no revenge, no bitterness, just a bridge left unburned. In the car ride home, Keanu glanced over and smiled. "How's it feel?" Elias looked out the window. The city lights were blurring by like stars. "Weird," he said. Keanu chuckled. "Weird good or weird scary?" "Both." They stopped at a red light. Keanu turned to face him. "Elias, you know the performance mattered. But the courage to stand up there, that's what people remember." Elias nodded slowly. It didn't feel like courage. It just felt like trying not to fall apart. Keanu looked ahead as the light turned green. That's what courage really is. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. Not because of nerves, not because of fear, but because something inside him had shifted. Something permanent. He sat by the window with his guitar and began humming a new tune. Not the one from the competition, not anything he had practiced. Something new, something born from all the silence, the pain, the surprise, the applause. He wrote lyrics on a torn notebook page. His hands moved without hesitation. By morning, he had written his first original song. A week later, Julia from the news show called, again. This time not for a feature. We're hosting a youth segment, she said. Would Elias like to debut his new song live? Keanu looked at his son. Elias didn't flinch. Yes, he said. They went to the studio together. As Elias waited in the green room, a tall boy in a school jacket came up and tapped him on the shoulder. Hey, the boy said. You're Elias, right? My sister was at the competition. She's still talking about you. That song, it helped her. She's been going through stuff. But when she saw you sing, she said she felt like someone understood. Elias stared. His heart beat a little faster. He didn't know what to say. So, he just nodded. Tell her thank you. When he walked on set and sat on the stool, the lights brightened slowly. The host smiled. Back with us again is Elias Reeves, who took home the gold at the district youth talent competition. But today he's doing something different. This is his first original song written just last week. Take it away, Elias. He began to play. The song was slow, steady, filled with moments that felt like breath, like healing. He sang about not being seen. He sang about being laughed at. He sang about fear, and how it stayed in your bones even when the sun came out. But most of all, he sang about rising anyway, about choosing to sing, even when your voice shakes. The news anchor wiped away a tear. The cameraman stopped adjusting his lens just to listen. By the end, there was no applause in the studio, just stillness. Then the feed cut and the studio lit up with emotion. That performance aired across the city, and this time, it went beyond local. Someone shared it on a popular parenting blog. A music critic reposted it, writing, "Rawest voice I've heard this year. This boy doesn't sing with lungs, he sings with truth." Within hours, the video had over 100,000 views. By the next day, it was 1 million. And then, everything changed again. A call came through. Not from media, not from a label, but from a quiet organization that supported kids with anxiety and trauma through music. They had seen Elias's video. They wanted to partner with him, to help inspire other kids who didn't believe their voices mattered. Elias looked up at Keanu. "Should I?" Keanu said. "Only if it feels right." Elias thought for a moment, then said the one thing that came from the deepest part of him. "I want to help someone feel how I felt that night on stage." And with that, a boy who had once been mocked for singing became a voice for those who had never dared to. The music, they couldn't silence. 3 weeks had passed since Elias's second performance aired on the morning show. What began as a simple, local spotlight had turned into something bigger than anyone imagined. Not just viral, but meaningful. His inbox flooded with messages. Kids from different schools wrote letters. Parents of children with social anxiety thanked him. Even teachers from other districts reached out saying his courage had changed how they saw their own students. Yet amid all the praise, Elias stayed the same, quiet, humble, thoughtful. Keanu watched him carefully, proud but cautious. He knew how fame could confuse even the kindest hearts. But Elias wasn't chasing anything. He still did his chores, still took out the trash, still sat with Keanu every morning sipping cocoa before school. The spotlight hadn't changed him. It had simply revealed who he already was. One Saturday afternoon, a letter arrived in a plain white envelope. No name on the front. Just a single word printed neatly in lowercase. Sorry. Elias opened it slowly. Inside was a handwritten note. 5 lines. I don't know why I hated you. I think it's because you were brave enough to be seen. I wish I had that. I hope you keep singing. Logan. Elias read it 3 times, then folded it, put it back in the envelope, and slid it into the side pocket of his school bag. He never told anyone about it, not even Keanu. But from that day on, he walked a little taller. 2 weeks later, Elias received an invitation to perform at a youth music event in San Francisco. It was a large gathering, over 5,000 people both in person and watching online. The theme was Voices of Change. The organizers wanted him to be the opening act. "We want someone who doesn't just sing well," the email read. "We want someone who sings with purpose." Elias stared at the message for a long time before turning to Keanu. "I think I want to go," he said. Keanu nodded slowly. "Then I'll be right there with you." The trip was quiet. No big film crew, no red carpet, just a father and son, with a backpack, a guitar, and a suitcase. They arrived in San Francisco the night before the show and stayed in a modest hotel. Elias spent most of the evening on the hotel balcony playing soft chords under the city lights. He wasn't nervous. He was something else. Ready? The next morning, they arrived at the venue early. Sound checks, stage lighting, equipment prep, it all buzzed around them, but Elias stayed calm. He sat cross-legged in a chair backstage, headphones on, eyes closed. As the audience began to fill the giant hall, a girl walked past him holding a violin. She paused, looked at him and said, "You're the kid from the video." He nodded. "Your song helped me sleep again," she whispered, then walked off without waiting for a response. Those words stayed with him. And when the stage manager called his name, Elias stood, picked up his guitar, and walked into the lights. The room was massive, a sea of faces, but Elias wasn't scared. He sat down on the stool, adjusted the mic, and spoke softly. "I used to be scared of being heard. Now I sing for the ones who still are." Then he played. This song wasn't from the competition. It wasn't the one he'd played on TV. This one was brand new. Written just a few days ago after reading letters from strangers who said he had changed their lives. The lyrics were simple, raw. "If you don't see me, I'll still sing. If you don't hear me, my voice still brings light to someone somewhere far, because music finds where the broken are." The moment he finished, the room fell silent again. Not from shock, but from healing. And then, without anyone prompting, the audience stood. The applause was soft at first, then grew, not loud, but deep, sincere. And in that moment, something strange happened, not to Elias, but to Keanu. He had been standing backstage just out of view, watching his son, watching the boy who had once asked, "What if they laugh?" And suddenly, the tears came, not from sadness, but from awe. He thought he had seen everything life had to show, but watching his son touch thousands of hearts with a simple song, that was something else. After the show, Elias was quiet as they walked back to the hotel, not from tiredness, but from reflection. He looked up at his father and asked, "Do you think Mom would have been proud?" Keanu placed an arm around his shoulder. "She would have been proud the moment you stood up on that stage. Everything after that is just music." They reached the hotel, but before going inside, Elias paused. He looked up at the stars, then whispered something too soft for even his father to hear. But Keanu didn't need to ask. He knew. And in that moment, they stood side by side, not as actor and son, not as public figure and performer, but simply as two people who had walked through doubt and found light on the other side. Later that night, an email came from a woman in another country. "My son hasn't spoken in 2 years. After watching your video, he walked over to our piano, sat down, and played a few notes. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us he's still there." Elias stared at the screen. He didn't reply right away. He just sat, holding the warmth of those words. Then quietly, he reached for his notebook and began writing again. Because now, he wasn't singing for himself anymore. He was singing for every voice that was still afraid to rise. His voice, their hope. The days turned into weeks. The messages didn't stop. More letters came, some handwritten, some emailed, some just short videos of children singing quietly to their screens. Some of them had speech disorders. Some had been bullied. Some simply wrote, "Thank you for not giving up." Elias read everyone. He saved each message in a box labeled "Hearts I Can Hear." He wasn't famous. Not in the Hollywood way, but he was becoming something deeper, a voice that made people feel seen. And to Elias, that meant more than any trophy. One afternoon, while sitting at the kitchen table, he got a call. A woman from a major charity wanted to meet. She ran a foundation for children who had suffered emotional trauma and abuse. She had seen his San Francisco performance. "We've tried therapists, music coaches, even actors to speak to these kids," she said. "But when they watched your video, some of them cried for the first time in months. Some smiled. Some sang." Elias didn't say much on the phone. Just, "How can I help?" And that's how it began. What was supposed to be one visit turned into a journey that would last months. They flew him out to a children's recovery center in Colorado. When he walked in, no one clapped. No cameras, no lights, just a group of kids, each with different stories. Pain in their eyes. Some couldn't make eye contact. Some hid behind stuffed animals. Some stared through him like he wasn't real and sat on the floor with them. No guitar, no stage, just him. And after a few minutes, he whispered, "I used to be afraid to speak too." The room was still. One boy asked, "What changed?" Elias smiled gently. "I realized being quiet doesn't mean you're broken. Sometimes it means you're just listening to the world before you speak back." A girl raised her hand. "Can we sing with you?" He nodded. He started humming. They joined in. Some barely whispered. Some were off key. One started crying halfway through. And none of that mattered, because in that moment, their voices weren't being judged. They were being heard. And that was enough. Keanu flew in a few days later. He stood at the back of the room watching as his son taught 6 children how to play a soft tune on ukuleles. Not one of them knew who Keanu Reeves was, but every one of them knew Elias. "He's the boy who sings with his heart," one child whispered. Keanu's eyes blurred. He walked over to Elias during lunch and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've gone beyond music now." Elias looked up. "What do you mean?" "You're not just changing how they hear," Keanu said. "You're changing how they see themselves." That night, Elias wrote a new song. He called it "Sing Anyway." A month later, he performed it on a small stage for a fundraiser to support music therapy programs. The room was full of donors, parents, and counselors. Some had never heard of Elias. Some only came because of the charity. But when he sang, the room quieted like a cathedral. If your voice is cracked and shaking, if the world has turned away, if your story feels too heavy, if your skies are always gray, sing anyway, sing anyway. Someone's listening far away. When the song ended, a woman in the back stood up and started clapping with tears in her eyes. Others followed. But Elias didn't bow. He stepped forward and said something that wasn't in the script. "There was a time I sang because I didn't know what else to do. Now I sing because I know how it feels when no one believes in you. If you're listening to this and you think your voice doesn't matter, it does. Even if only one person hears it. Even if that person is you." After the event, a record producer approached him. She handed him her card. "Your voice doesn't need polish. It already has purpose," she said. "We'd be honored to help you share it with more people." Elias didn't say yes right away. He told her, "I have to think about it." Because for him, it was never about being discovered. It was about staying real. Months passed. Elias kept performing, but only where it mattered. Schools, shelters, recovery centers. He worked with therapists to build music programs for kids who didn't have words for their pain. Sometimes he didn't even sing. He just listened, and Keanu was always there, not as the actor, not even as the guide, just as a father. The man who stood behind the curtain when the world first heard a trembling voice that refused to break. One rainy evening, they were back home, sitting on the porch with blankets around their shoulders. The rain tapped gently on the roof. Keanu turned to his son. "Do you miss the stage?" Elias shook his head. "I found a better one." "Where?" In hearts. They sat in silence for a while. Then Keanu smiled. Your mom would have loved your music. Elias leaned his head on his father's shoulder. I think she hears it. And maybe she did. In the laughter of children who found their voice again, in the letters from strangers who no longer felt invisible, in the quiet strength of a boy who was once mocked for singing, and now used that same voice to heal others. And somewhere, on a shelf in a quiet home, sat a simple wooden box labeled, Hearts I Can Hear. Each note inside, a reminder, a voice born in pain can still sing in power. And when you sing from the soul, the world listens.